Ukraine's war against Russian aggression is indeed a complex one, as Ukraine is forced to fight a state that not only outnumbers it in terms of military resources, but also has no limits in choosing the means to achieve its goals. While Ukraine relies on its professional military and the ordinary people who are mobilized, Russia resorts to dubious and even illegal methods. The Kremlin is actively using mercenaries, for example, the Korean military, which North Korea, one of Russia's key allies, can use to support its aggression. Only in October, North Korea sent 12,000 of its elite military personnel to Russia. In addition, it is known that Putin also uses non-professional military personnel, such as prisoners in his arsenal, offering them amnesty in exchange for service and mentally ill people. This approach not only expands the number of military personnel, but also saves Russia the need to spend resources on training professional fighters. Although the quality of such an army is questionable, they are used in meaty assaults. In addition to human resources, Russia widely uses assistance from other countries, including North Korea and Iran, to replenish its arsenals. These can be various types of weapons that compensate for losses or support offensive actions. It is known that Russia uses only about 30% of its own weapons in war, while the rest comes from partners. This support underscores how significant the assistance from North Korea and Iran, and also points to Russia's lack of self-sufficiency in military resources, as it can no longer meet all its needs on its own. Russia's approach to war, where it involves not only its citizens, but also enlists the support of other authoritarian states, creates a particularly difficult situation for Ukraine. Ukraine's military is facing an enemy that uses a variety of methods and means, with no limits to its resources or ethical boundaries. The involvement of foreign military forces, prisoners, and possibly even people with mental illnesses in the war indicates that Russia is ready to disregard generally accepted norms of warfare. Western countries that support Ukraine, for their part, are constrained by certain international rules, providing Ukraine with only defensive weapons and assistance that complies with generally accepted norms. At the same time, Russia resorts to illegal support of its partners, who also violate international norms by selling or transferring their weapons without proper sanctions. This makes the war unequal, not only in terms of the number of troops, but also in moral and legal terms. It also became known that Russia plans to send people with hepatitis B and C to the war. According to Ukraine's intelligence, the Russian Ministry of Defense issued Order 610, dated October 10, 2024. It excludes hepatitis C from the list of diseases that do not allow for military service. The Russians did this in order to man units from prisoners with hepatitis. Hepatitis patients are labeled as Contingent C in the document. It is noted that before being sent to the front, sick prisoners in colonies should be formally injected with a vaccine against hepatitis B and undergo a course of antiviral therapy for hepatitis C. According to the Russian leaders, their new mobilization decision will allow them to involve thousands of prisoners in the meat assaults in the war against Ukraine. This decision has caused serious concern among experts because the involvement of people with chronic diseases, including hepatitis B and C, not only puts them at significant risk, but also creates possible medical threats in the war zone. Hepatitis C is a chronic viral liver disease that spreads through contact with contaminated blood and has the potential to be transmitted in war, where sanitary and hygienic standards are difficult to maintain. By planning the use of the C contingent, the Russian Defense Ministry is actually lowering the health standards traditionally considered mandatory for military service, which could lead to even greater depletion of the health of the mobilized. The announced preventive measures, such as hepatitis B vaccination and antiviral therapy, only create the appearance of medical support. Hepatitis C treatment is a long and expensive process, and it is probably impossible to provide it in the field. Therefore, prisoners sent to the front line are actually left without proper medical support. The recruitment of people with hepatitis, according to experts, is also a step that demonstrates the growing difficulties in manning the army. The lack of healthy reserves is forcing the Russian command to turn to human resources that are usually considered unacceptable in combat operations. This shows that the previous stages of mobilization have already significantly depleted the reserves, and the growing resistance to mobilization among the population complicates the implementation of plans to increase military power. Involvement of prisoners with hepatitis in the war is also a manifestation of cynical policy. Against the backdrop of heavy losses at the front, the mobilization machine no longer distinguishes between the healthy and the sick. This approach adds new elements to the tactics of meat assaults that Russia has repeatedly used. Prisoners are usually not provided with proper equipment and skills, which significantly increases their risk of death. Ukrainian intelligence and international experts suggest that this decision may also have consequences for the regional epidemiological situation. The presence of a large number of people with chronic infectious diseases in the combat zone may contribute to the spread of viruses in the eastern regions of Ukraine and beyond, creating additional risks to the health of the civilian population. As for Ukraine, it has to fight this war according to the rules of the democratic world. Ukraine, by adhering to the rules of international humanitarian law, is demonstrating in a particularly important way that it is also possible to remain a civilized state in times of war that does not stoop to the methods used by aggressors. In accordance with the Geneva Conventions, which define the rules for the treatment of prisoners of war, Ukraine provides Russian prisoners of war with basic rights, such as access to medical care, humane treatment, and basic needs. Representatives of the Red Cross, an international organization that monitors compliance with humanitarian law, note that the Ukrainian side provides proper conditions for the detention of prisoners. This demonstrates not only a commitment to international norms, but also the difference in approaches between Ukraine and Russia, where human rights violations and inhumane treatment of prisoners and civilians are constantly recorded. For example, this is what Russian prisoners of war look like. They are well-fed, clean, and in acceptable conditions. And this is what Ukrainian soldiers who were captured by Russia look like. From normal people, they turn into shadows of themselves, emaciated, pale, skin-covered skeletons. Most of them are subjected to constant physical and psychological torture by Russian prison guards. The memories of those who were lucky enough to return are frightening in their frankness. Mass beatings, bullying, hunger strikes, and attempts to break the will of Ukrainian soldiers are becoming a daily reality. They are forbidden to correspond with their families, cut off from any information about their homes and loved ones, and attempts are made to destroy all emotional ties. Winter frosts and summer heat add to the harsh conditions that cause prisoners of war to lose their health. Even if a chance for an exchange does arise, not everyone survives to see it. Poor nutrition, infections, lack of medical care, and constant physical and moral pressure make the body give up. Ukraine has repeatedly asked the United States to allow it to use Western long-range weapons to strike at Russian territory. The idea is that such strikes could not only cause significant damage to Russia's military and infrastructure facilities, but also force the Kremlin to reconsider its goals in the war against Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian side, this could create conditions for a quicker end to the war, as the reduction of Russia's capabilities on its own territory could encourage negotiations and a diplomatic settlement of the conflict. Despite this, the White House administration has so far not allowed Ukraine to use American weapons to strike Russian territory. One of the main reasons for this position is the fear of an escalation of the war and possible consequences for NATO allies. Washington explains this by saying that attacks on Russian territory could be perceived by the Kremlin as a pretext for expanding the conflict, which could lead to unpredictable consequences. However, in this situation, we need to understand that Ukraine itself is unlikely to be able to cope with 3 countries at once. Putin will not disregard any rules. He will continue to attract support from outside to achieve his own ambitions. It is important to understand that Ukraine is not only fighting Russia, it is defending the principles of democracy and freedom for the entire democratic world. If Ukraine fails to withstand the pressure, it could send a serious signal that totalitarianism can defeat democracy and force will become the main tool for resolving international conflicts. This would be a dangerous precedent that would show that aggression and war can be effective means to achieve goals. China, as another example of a totalitarian country, will get a clear example that military aggression can be waged against democratic countries and won, even using dirty methods. This will increase the threat to neighboring Asian countries that fear China's expansion. If the world allows Ukraine to be left alone in this fight, other autocratic regimes will be encouraged to expand their influence, and democratic countries will be at even greater risk. In this conflict, Ukraine has stood up to defend global values, and its struggle is important not only for Ukraine, but for all countries that believe in freedom, equality, and sovereignty. The international community must unite in support of Ukraine, because it is here that the front line between two ideological worlds, democracy and totalitarianism, is drawn. Thank you, friends, for watching this video to the end. Please share it if you found it useful and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with the latest developments. The video is based on the materials of Hustler. Peace and freedom to you.